So, good morning, everyone. Nice to be here with the guys from BigTec. My name's Daniel. I'm from vARMOUR. I run channels and alliances across EMEA. And what I wanted to talk to you about today was a bit about vARMOUR, why we exist, and kind of what we do. So, vARMOUR was founded by two guys, Roger and Michael Shea, and they come from a NetScreen background. So, they helped to develop the NetScreen firewalls that obviously got acquired into Juniper. And what happened is that they decided that if they were going to come back and do this again, would they do it in the same way? So they decided that when they were going to build the next kind of iteration of a firewall, what would it need to look like and what would it need to be? And they founded vARMOUR. And what they really wanted to do was kind of build this distributed capability. Now, one of the first things they did when they realised that what they had and believed that they had something very powerful was get a number of the people that they first worked with and get them together, but also patent some of the technology that we had. So things like micro-segmentation is a patent that vARMOUR owns. Further down the road, they brought in a guy called Tim Eads, who's ex-Silvertail, which got acquired by RSA. And what he brought to the technology that Michael and Roger had already built was the idea of powerful analytics, because that was the heritage of Silvertail, and then combining the two, this idea of being kind of a fully capable or having layer 7 capability, and then putting analytics underneath it, this kind of all-seeing, all-knowing, was a powerful technology. A few more people joined the company, and what we really have been successful in doing is bringing people in from industry. So our CTO is a guy called Mark Walwood, who comes in from Goldman Sachs, and he very much helped us to kind of customize what we had. Give us the perspective from a customer. What would they do if they had this type of technology within their environment? What could they do? What did it make sense? Rock solid financials. VC funded, so we're not going to be going anywhere anytime soon, and very committed. In terms of the operation, we have operations in the US, we have operations in EMEA, which cover from the UK, in the Middle East, and into Asia Pac. So, Charles Darwin, this is a nod from Tony, but Charles Darwin is often misquoted when he said it was the survival of the fittest. What he actually said, it's those who survive are the ones who adapt the fastest. And that's true for everyone that's sat in this room. It's true for the vendors, it's true for the partners, it's true for the end user as well. This change that is happening, this change of moving from traditional approaches to more software defined, cloud, it's happening. You can't stop it. And the ones that believe that the future is still in traditional, you're going to quickly find yourself as a vendor, as a partner, as a customer or a client, that you're not able to compete in this new thing that's being built. So that's why we're here. We believe that standing next to all these other vendors and standing next to the partners, that obviously you are here and you believe that there is a future coming, there's a change, that this is the way forward. And that's what vARMOUR is all about. So I don't want to kind of regurgitate some of the stuff that probably Joel talked about in terms of this transformation, but there's been a monumental shift in the way that we've seen this digital transformation, this new thing that people are consuming and where it's kind of come from. We're here. We're here where people are now looking at the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Googles as a new competition. And the competition comes in from surprising places. I was in Paris a few weeks ago talking with SocGen. And we were talking about kind of this whole move. And I said, what do you feel? We speak to a lot of clients every day that are looking at benefiting from software defined, the cloud. And they said, we would never go to the cloud. I was like, well, why is that? Why would you not go to the cloud? Everyone else seems to be doing that. And they said, well, just think about this. How quickly could Amazon become a retail bank? I was like, I don't know, months? And they said, like that. They said, because they've got all of this information already. They've got all the infrastructure. And guess what? If SocGen put our infrastructure in AWS, we prove we are the test case that you can become a retail bank. Now, it won't happen, it's going to take some time. There are a few barriers to entry, absolutely. You can't deny that. But it's fact. Your competition is no longer the company sat next to you. It's in the strangest of places. So SocGen see AWS as competition. So they've got a choice, and vARMOUR believe this choice too. And it kind of goes back to that quote. You stay traditional, you start to become obsolete. Or you move to the cloud, and you can become obsolete. The way that you stay current and you build that future is you build your infrastructure better than the cloud providers do. You move your company into this new software era, this new agile data center. And it's not just us, it's Nutanix, it's VM Turbo, it's this stack that BigTec are talking about. It's a powerful message. So this digital transformation has forced this data center transformation, and the data center is changing. So pre-2010, 2010-ish, this idea of a data center was this brick-built thing. You knew where it was, it had everything stuck in it, you knew what the perimeter was, and you could kind of keep track of things. That's changed. The data center is now spread out. The perimeter is gone. You're benefiting. It's more highly virtualized. It needs to be agile. It's something we talk about a lot, and it's been used a couple of times in some presentations before. But there was a question asked of NatWest Bank, and someone said, what's the busiest NatWest branch in the UK? So everyone surmised what they thought the answer was. Must be here in London. It's the 8:05 train into Houston, because people get up on a Monday, as they're getting on the train, they log into their bank. The application has moved. People's demand has moved. And in a traditional way in which you could kind of judge that, build the application and provision it for that, that's now changed. People demand, people are doing things that you don't expect, or the demand is moving. And the data center, your infrastructure, your technologies need to move with it. They need to be agile by design. It needs to be scheduled. So this whole idea, and Joel probably mentioned it before, this idea of this kind of, provision these huge stacks to kind of deal with applications and kind of leave them there. It's going. You need this idea of this web scale, this scale out. Build it and then grow it out, rather than provision these huge bundles, try and grow into it, and often over provision and underutilize. Now, vARMOUR's lucky because look, in vARMOUR we've got a lot of expertise in security, but we've also got a lot of expertise in the infrastructure side. So vARMOUR talk a lot about the infrastructure and a lot about the data center, because we fundamentally believe that when you're having these architectural discussions, these discussions about the infrastructure, security must become built into those discussions. You must build security into the architecture from the very outset, rather than trying to build it or bolt it on as security always has been. It's the after effect. You're compromising, you're building these beautiful applications, you're building this lovely network, and then someone comes along and puts a box there. And they have to compromise the integrity of that architecture to plumb in a firewall or plumb in some security. Now, the interesting thing for me, when we talk about the perimeter and the kind of the idea of this perimeter going, it's some of the rhetoric that the traditional security vendors will come out with, which we'll get onto later. So this is how we view the transformation of an end user, a client's infrastructure. We see that it's going to be a staged approach. We see that there is going to be this traditional to virtualized to the idea that we're all standing here talking about, which is this software defined environment. Now, the interesting thing yesterday is that I spoke to a guy yesterday about this move, and they're very much fixed here. And I said to him, this is what we do. What are your challenges? And he said, I'm terrified of going from here to here. I said, why are you terrified of doing that? He said, because I've got no control of this. I lose control. I said, why do you think you lose control? He said, because the way that I've always done things is I've built all this stuff out and I don't want to kind of pick all this stuff up and move it all over here. Obviously, there was a few more technical things in there than stuff, but generally that was what we were talking about. But the idea was, and when we kind of got into the nuts and bolts of it, it was like, this is the beauty of what we are talking about, what Nutanix, what VM Turbo, what vARMOUR are talking about. You don't have to go from traditional all the way over to software defined in one hit. You don't have to buy vBlock and provision for 5 years out and never get there and underutilize, and it's waste of money. And we know this because one of the guys that runs Europe for vARMOUR is one of the people that sold a lot of VCE when it first came out. So we know a lot about what's been sold, what's not been used, what's been overutilized or underutilized. So we've got a lot of information about that. So what we then got into the discussion was well, Nutanix. Nutanix gives you the ability to have that small building block. And vARMOUR can complement that really nicely by putting security in that building block. And then we can optimize and manage it using VM Turbo to make sure that you're utilizing the most of that. It's a great architecture story. And guess what? You don't have to go it and put it across all of your environment. You can go and put it into one small, low risk area that you can kind of go and test it out on. And then what you can do is once you've tested the format and you can see what you can do with it, you can build out as you need. Web scale, the scale out, and it's cost effective. There's no over provisioning, there's no underutilization. You deploy it as and when you need it. So what we see, and a lot of our customer discussions around why security doesn't fit this new modern architecture is precisely because of what I've just said, which is people are making these fast, agile environments, and then what they're doing is trying to bolt security on top in a traditional way. And it causes all kinds of technical challenges. Traffic steering, tromboning, and fundamentally breaks the things that you're trying to build. Why are we building things in software? Why are we building things, these fast agile applications to be competitive? And then we're putting boxes in place that slow all this down. Now, the interesting thing is that when you talk about security, people tend to think about this very kind of traditional north-south. And if you listen to some of the key people in that security industry, they will talk to you about, the perimeter is dead. You are getting breached. There is no stopping that breach. And these are the very people that are supposed to be protecting the things, or your clients or the partners are selling these technologies. Now, what the new shift is that if you know more about the threat and you can better get yourself prepared for what happens and how you remove or remediate that threat, that's the way we combat these consistent attacks. So if you think about this kind of north-south, there's over 500,000 virtualized data centers around the world. 43% last year were breached. So there's a massive blind spot in a data center. Also, if you think about the amount of traffic, only less than 20% of the traffic, or 20%, actually hits the perimeter. 80+% is actually internal traffic. Yet when you flip that in terms of economics, most of the spend in security is pointed at the perimeter, and stacked high, vertically scaled, box on top of box on top of box. Whereas in the data center, there's very little security. And obviously that's where something like vARMOUR looks to kind of readdress the balance. vARMOUR is not about going in and trying to get rid of the perimeter. The perimeter does a job. You would never take the front door off your house. Keep the firewall where it's supposed to be at the perimeter. It does the job. But what vARMOUR is talking about is the technical advantages of removing some of these trust zones, these things that you've built in physical or virtual instances of physical box, and place it with a better architecture, which is in software. Now, because of what we can do and our capability and where we're situated and then we kind of put some stuff around the analytics, and we start to build up a picture of what that infrastructure looks like, then we can do some powerful things in terms of giving you some really clear visibility and being able to make some really fundamental different choices within that environment, which we'll come on to a bit later. So the next security system, or the next wave of security, needs to be extensible. It needs to be able to interoperate seamlessly with other things that are happening within the environment. It needs to be scalable. You know, you hear a lot about distributed systems, web scale, and we'll continue to hear more about that as people kind of venture into the software-defined environment. It needs to be independent. You know, you can't be tied into someone else's cycle, their development cycle. You can't be in a position where you're trying to that any changes you make are reliant on someone else making changes too. And you've got to be actionable. There's lots of things in today's kind of security environment that don't give you any form of remediation. They give you lots and lots of information, lots of things that you can go and do, but you can't actually do anything with them. You've got to put them into some kind of aggregation tool, and then it becomes post-event analysis. So, like I said, once we start to look at some of the things that we can do, and from a visibility standpoint, and the information that we get, we can start to introduce some very interesting things around microsegmentation. And again, microsegmentation is kind of the end goal. In my experience and working with lots of different companies, people still like the idea of security zones, but there's a better way of doing it. The economics around security zones is, for us, that you can go in and all of those things, all of those physical or virtual instances, you can collapse and put software in that place. You can still fundamentally keep the idea of a security zone, but you can take out those internal controls. And what does that give you? For us, and from the customer point of view, increased utilization. We are, by the things we need to protect, you only install, you only deploy things that you need to employ. You're not over-provisioning. And we've seen that in many cases where you're building these applications and you don't just build it once, you build it multiple times. And in certain customer environments, they have got lots and lots of kit because it's the de facto, it's the standard. And actually, when you look at it, you've got lots of applications that completely don't need the capacity of security that's in there. So from our point of view, once you get into that environment, you can start to collapse some of that infrastructure. So technically, a much neater solution. From an economic standpoint, huge amounts of cost saving. It's a journey, and that was it kind of highlighted yesterday. We don't expect people to go from the traditional side to the software-defined overnight. We don't expect that. What we expect is to see people make the shift across. The traditional into the virtualized has already happened, and it will continue to happen. But this idea of moving all the way over here, again, it's starting to happen. We're going to see pockets of people that are buying into Nutanix, that are buying into vARMOUR and VM Turbo and those kind of technologies. But we're also going to see that they've still got infrastructure here. And we're going to see they've still got infrastructure here because they can't get rid of some of the legacy technology or legacy environments they've got. So, we truly believe that, from our point of view and our capability needs to be stretched across all of these environments so that you can help to prove that customers can move, very nicely into this part, which is, as Tony kind of talked about at the start, this software-defined data center. So from that point of view, vARMOUR has built this first distributed system, able to stretch across physical, virtual, private cloud and public cloud. We do some really interesting stuff around the private cloud and the public cloud into AWS. All kind of underpinned by analytics, one single logical system, everything in software, and policy controlled down to a granular level. And vARMOUR is extensible, fully API driven, which allows us to integrate into the likes of Nutanix, into VM Turbo, into people like Arista, into people like Nuage. So all this, when we talk about these VCE, V-blocks, flex pods, this stuff that you're building in hardware, if you look at what BigTec are doing, we're effectively building this in software. The utopia is that we can walk into a customer and sell the block. But again, you can sell this stuff in isolation and build on it. Scalable. vARMOUR again follows this web scale architecture. You buy what you need, you provision what you need when you need it. From a Nutanix point of view, works wonderfully. As you're provisioning a Nutanix node, provision security at the same time. Independent, we're not tied to anyone else's development cycle. We're independent, so we can continue to innovate on our own and still deliver that same capability. And lastly, and probably the most important, is actionable. We can give you the ability to make decisions when you see it happening. If you see traffic flows that you don't know what they are, misconfiguration, hacks, if you see unusual traffic flows, you have the ability to stop and block them at the point that you see them in near real-time capability. And lastly, the way that we deliver that, certainly from a very light touch, is this idea of the DSSV, visibility only. You are paying customers are paying a lot of money for visibility tools that don't remediate, lots of information, they're very expensive. So we have the ability to come in, deploy DSSV in a very short amount of time, and then show you what is actually going on in the network. We have a threat team that sits behind this, so whether it be from a partner perspective or a customer perspective, the threat team can come in, work with you to understand exactly what is going on. What are the flows we're seeing? What do they actually mean? Are they just badly configured, or is it someone trying to do something they shouldn't be doing? What we're seeing in the US is that 20% or 25% of these are turning into committed revenue, and it's taking 20 days to turn these over. So from a partner perspective, a very easy way to go in and try and talk to customers about the things, this blind spot they're not seeing in a data center. So I'd encourage, if you haven't, to take a look. And like I say, we can work with you to get these done. So that's vARMOUR in a short space of time. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Dave.